My name's Richard Leonard. I'm the parish priest of this Jesuit parish of North Sydney, and it's my great joy and honour to be invited to welcome all of you to our parish community, and especially to recognise and thank Catalyst for Renewal for bringing us all together tonight. It's wonderful to see so many have come out on a Sunday night for this occasion. It's my job to do two things. Firstly, to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, so we acknowledge the Camaragal people of the Aurora Nation and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And the second thing is to introduce a woman who needs, thank God, no introduction. So Geraldine Doogue, I think, has been one of the great champions both for expression of religion in this country and just a champion of sane Catholic faith expressed in terms that people can both understand and appreciate. I've had a direct experience of it with working with her in Rome many years ago during a papal election, which gave us Francis, and but that wasn't funny, I didn't think, but we were happy enough, but also indirectly, just to know the fights that she must have taken in the ABC to keep religion somewhat front and centre and to keep a sane, wonderful brand. And so her passion and her faith have been inspiring to me, and I no doubt imagine to many of you too. Let's take a welcome to welcome Geraldine.
Well, thank you, Richard, very much indeed. That's lovely of you. I was actually being reminded just the other day of that time in Rome, and because I was there with Compass, and we were told at this particular point that there'd be no white smoke. Don't worry. I said, have I got time to have my hair done? Yes, you do have time to have your hair done. So I'm sitting there with wet hair, being blow-dried, ready to do pieces to camera much later. And I suddenly see this stream of people wandering past, getting faster and faster. And I said to them, there's all these people moving down towards St. Peter's. Something's going on. And they said, yes. And I rang my producer. I said, what's happening? He said, yeah, we think there's going to be white smoke. So I said, right, finish this hair, just do whatever you have to do, burn me if necessary to get this hair dry. And I got the hair dry and ran down to St. Peter's, got into the square just in time. And so it's just an incredible memory in my mind. And I'd seen Richard the day before, so that was, and then we had that simply wondrous moment in the square. So it's lovely to be here tonight, and it is great to see so many out on a Sunday night, and I'm delighted for this forum from the Catalyst has prompted, becoming synodal or synodal people, the formation of clergy and laity. And there's just lots of questions, and I'm really, this is very much a work in progress, as we know. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Father Agbonkhianmeghe E, Orabator, a Jesuit from Dean of Santa Clara University's Jesuit School of Theology. He was a delegate to the Synod on Synodality, and he's a leading theological voice in ecclesiology, human rights, human dignity, and the participation of women in the life of the Church. And I think that just might come up tonight. Dr. Sandie Cornish is also with us. She's a senior lecturer in theology at the ACU, and I think a lot of us are becoming extremely aware of her involvement. She's a theological advisor for the Catholic Church's for the Fifth Plenary Council, and an expert and facilitator at the Synod on Synodality. And Father Paul Monkerud is an episcopal vicar of the western region of the Archdiocese of Sydney and a former chair of the ongoing formation of Clergy Committee, and has just come from, in fact, both he and Sandie have just come from a big meeting of the diocese priests, which we've been talking about over a cup of tea. Very interesting indeed what's emerging. So look, what I propose to do, and a couple of little bits of housekeeping, for people, we will after we have our little buzz at 8 o'clock, which always have a little buzz, it's a Catalyst tradition, we'll open the floor to questions. We'll have microphones here, but at home, if you're listening from home, you can send your questions in and they'll be fed to me, and we can wrestle with them. And our aim is to be ready, as you know, we're very time conscious, at 9:15, when we can all resume our normal life and keep thinking. which I think there'll be plenty to think about. But I'm going to ask all of you here tonight just to make some establishing statements for about 5 minutes each. And I've thought about how to ask this, where are you directing your prayers? Let me put it that way. At this point in proceedings, May, ahead of October, where does your hope lie? Not just your optimism, we're always told about the difference in the church, but where does your hope lie? And I suppose, to be fair, I'm also going to ask you, where does your concern lie? So I'm going to ask you first, Father Orabator, how would you approach that?
Thank you, Geraldine, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to have this conversation. I believe that for me, given the experience I've had of this journey of synodality, the hope I have is that we remain focused on the journey. I still believe that the journey, the process, is important for us to reimagine a new way of being church together. And the extent to which we can focus on this journey, this process, will determine how successful we are in reimagining this way. So that, to your point about concern, so that we don't get derailed by issues or questions that come out of our ideological positions, our personal interests, but that we remain focused on embedding, incarnating this new way of being church. So that if we can get that right, then we have a way of dealing with the issues and matters of concern and consequence. That's what I'm hoping for, that's what I'm praying for, and that's also what concerns me.
Okay, that's a very... Sandie, how do you see it?
Very similarly, actually. I hope that we'll become a more authentic, spirit-led church, that we'll move past the polarisation of these last couple of decades to really focus on being the Church of Jesus Christ in and for the world, that we will nurture habits of attentiveness, particularly to the cry of the poor and of the earth, and respond with an openness to where the Spirit leads us. My concern similarly is that there are so many important issues that have been raised by listening to people in the synodal process, but the very most important thing is the way. It's the process itself. So I was very interested to see that the Synod Secretariat has now set up 10 different study groups. So one of the ways in which they're trying to avoid this potential trap of getting bogged down in particular issues that have been raised is to have study groups looking at those in a process that will be alongside the Synod but also extending past the Synod. So hopefully that will help us to focus on the process itself. I guess another concern is that I see a kind of an eagerness of a kind to become more synodal that is being expressed in some ways in a kind of formulaic appropriation of conversation in the Spirit. Follow these steps and you've done it, you've discerned. But many people here would know that there's a whole lot more to discernment than simply following a formula. It's good that we have more familiarity with conversation in the Spirit, and that there have been experiences in the plenary council preparation, in the various parts of the listening for the Synod, and people are becoming more familiar. I see some CLC faces in the crowd too. But to make a fetish of one particular way of discerning, I think is a danger as well. So to really Move more deeply into habits of discernment, personally and also collectively, would be my great hope for the church.
Righto. And Father Paul.
Well, I'm not sure I can say that I'm praying for synodality and all that. That might reflect on me a bit. I have a dream, and my dream is focused on the parishes of which I'm pastor primarily, because that incarnates faith and vocation for me and always has. But in my roles, I have a broader perspective too. Particularly just for the last 7.5 years, I've been chairing the ongoing formation of clergy in the Archdiocese of Sydney, and we've just come off a 4-day seminar on synodality. But my dream is that the language of synodality, which excites me, the idea of journeying together, together with what I think is a really great document, at least potentially, the Archdiocesan mission plan, Go Make Disciples, where we're trying to articulate something of, well, how do you go about and strategically enabling our people to move in their faith towards that kind of really ownership of their relationship with Jesus, and that begins then more and more to compel them to first of all see that they're already serving beautifully, many of them, but also that there's so much more that can be done and that might give them great fulfilment in their lives. I dream of the parishes that I minister, especially the big one at Liverpool, All Saints, being a real laboratory, if you like, for that dynamic. Where I am, we're trying to now put in synodality already, which is really about trying to listen to the context. And as we listen more, there's so much loneliness, so much need for just someone to listen to people, let alone give them things, but just to listen to them. And there are people already that are responding from our community to that. They haven't had that opportunity before. So I see this as the tip of the iceberg, and naive as I think I am at times, I just dream that we'll have parishes, for example, there are other groups as well, but for me it's the parish, that will really be able to be a place where people can actually tell their stories be respected, they start to get excited because all of a sudden people are listening to them, and therefore they then start to be animators of other people's stories. And I think, so for me, synodality can give us a language and a structure to do all that.
And look, the range of thoughts, wasn't this happening before? Like, I mean, the idea of listening to each other, of bringing people in, is there then a sort of a new prompt, has there?
I suppose it depends on what context you're talking about. For me, in a parish context, and I suspect it's been about primarily providing, in many places, services, liturgical services, sacramental services, prayer services, all of that stuff. But a parish is called to be and can be much more than that. So I'll give you an example. When I first got to All Saints almost 8 years ago, the questions I was asked were, can we have more devotions? Can we have more rosaries? Can we have more opportunities for prayer? And that's a wonderful thing because people are really searching for a haven to where they could pray. But they weren't the same questions about, can we have social outreach for the people around here who are struggling, who are in drug addict or alone or whatever. And so what we've tried to do through this impetus of synodality, I think, and also the Go Make Disciples, is to try and write the needle whereby our community is starting to see more and more that the prayer and the worship is not an end in itself, but it's in order to go out and make these conversations, engage in these conversations that are empowering for all.
So it's refreshed. It's very much refreshed.
It's in our network, yeah. But I think that the danger is that the synod, and one of the risks, of course, is the synodality that my colleagues would see that this is more to an already exhausting schedule. And so, well, you know, because synodality, as the Pope would say, is in journeying together and listening, is a complex and time and energy consuming reality. And I think that's something that has to be addressed going forward. Yeah.
I want to come back to that, but I also want to come to, Sandie, your words, habits of discernment. Do you know, I still don't know what that means. In other words, you know, there's all sorts of words around this process that everybody throws around and nods, and gosh, they can be so abstract.
Yes, and people can just pick up the language of discernment, but what are they really talking about?
Quite.
And I see that Ian Cribb's with us tonight and will be able to speak much more knowledgeably than myself on this. But for me, the heart of it is to be listening to the movement of God in myself, in the world and in others, rather than simply weighing up and making decisions. And I guess this is one of the dangers of this moment in the Synod between the two assemblies, and we had it a little bit with the Plenary Council as well, when it got towards the second assembly, when decisions were going to be made about documents. The focus on prayer and reflection and listening and trying to discern what was emerging from the prayer and reflection of the group slipped a bit in some cases, and people moved into a more parliamentary debating kind of a mode. People began to want to go in for the win on the document. And I think this is a moment when we've really got to hold fast to our prayer.
But you know what I mean? In a way, that's obvious that there's all of that preparation and then decisions. You'd think would have to be made. And so there would be a bit of anxiety ahead of decision-making, would there? But then nobody talks about decision-making. Everybody keeps talking about it.
One of the things that emerged at the Synod, certainly at the tables that I was facilitating, was a distinction between decision-making and decision-taking.
All right.
And I think that's quite significant.
What's the
particularly
difference?
for the laity, because there are ways in which we can be involved in the making of the decision and the way that it's prepared for, the ingredients, some of the cooking, but who actually takes the decision in the end? And this is a point of some contention as well. Who has the power to make, who has the authority, I should say, rather than simply the power, who has the authority to finally take certain decisions and on what basis? I think that's really a thing for us to think through more in the church. And how do we prepare for the decision making even? One of the things that worried me a bit about a certain process that I was involved in, people thought they could just come to the table without having already done their homework. In a discernment, you don't just turn up and discern on the spot. You do your homework, you do the research, you think, you pray, you come prepared. You know, the conversation in the first round of the spiritual conversation process used at the Synod was not meant to be, you know, off the top of your head like an interview. People were meant to have actually really seriously prepared for that. So I think there are more habits of discernment that we need still to learn more deeply. I meet people who know about the 3 rounds, but they don't seem to know about preparing for the first round. So thinking about the whole process of how decisions are prepared for, made and taken.
Father Bartle, how do you think priests, the clergy, is hearing this quite complicated process that's being described?
Well, I would not pretend to speak for priests and clergy, and I can speak from my own experience of having been involved in this process over the last 3 years. I think it comes at many levels. The initial, I think, reaction could be characterized as a feeling of threat.
Feeling of threat.
a feeling of confusion, a certain lack of understanding about what this really means. I think going beyond that, there is also a feeling that as we narrow in on questions of concern or issues, there's a certain way in which priests and clergy can feel that they're on trial.
Right.
When you think, for example, of how much emphasis, we're just talking about how authority is exercised, how discernment, how decisions are made, the emphasis that is placed on the shortcoming of clericalism and how that is repeated over and over again, that can begin to seem like a focus on one particular constituency within the church, and that will be priests and clergy. So that generates a certain level of anxiety and concern in reaction to this process. But I would also say that I've encountered situations where there is enthusiasm for this process, this new way of being community, a real desire to learn, to understand. I've been involved in formation programs, for example, for seminarians, for rectors of seminaries, specifically on this issue of synodality, where there's real enthusiasm to find out, just what is our role and what responsibility do we bear for promoting this process of synodality, and what do we need to learn? So it's a range of reactions that I would say I have witnessed.
Where have you seen it done well, if I can ask that? I often find it really, rather than where is it done poorly, what are the models?
What is the it?
Less anxiety, more buy-in to the process. I suppose that's what I'd say the it is.
Yeah. I think where I've found it being done well is when you really have a well-laid-out process for informing people, forming people, and listening to people's anxieties or questions or concerns. I'll give you an example. We did in April a program of formation for seminary rectors in 17 different seminaries in Southern Africa region. And you could tell that amongst the participants, there was real interest in finding out just what's my role in this? And how do I promote this? What do I need to know? What is discernment? How do I discern? So that, I can become a partner in this process, not consider myself a bystander.
So they weren't resisting?
No, there was a real desire, a real genuine desire to learn, to understand, and to be a part of this process.
Would you say, have you experienced that in Liverpool, would you say?
Yes, certainly. In that specific context, people come alive when they kind of get the fact that the church is actually asking their opinion and really kind of valuing it. And so, for example, I can think of two straight away. We have a senior leadership team which is working out of the divine renovation model to try and get a collaboration happening in our place, the ends of which will be a very intensive collaboration out of which we get a leadership group and pastoral council, which hopefully all the stakeholders will buy in. And though we've met about 8 times now, and we've been doing the spiritual conversations, which is clearly part of the synodal journey, and that's been, you can see the members who are very diverse starting to trust each other. And I think discernment comes out of trust. It's a relational thing. It's about people believing after a while that they're really on a mission that they all feel passionate about, but it's also, they can give their own, and there can be conflict and all of that stuff, but there's a deeper reality to which they all buy in. So this is the unity and diversity thing that is so important in this whole doing of synodality. We're not trying to all be the same. We're trying to be able to to learn to work with difference and recognise that difference, rather than be a threat, is an opportunity to be much broader in our perspective and our response than otherwise we might. So, and the other is one of them, and it's a battle, I can tell you, so I wouldn't want to Pollyanna this at all, but certainly in terms of our outreach, we now feed, we started off offering people around the area, because we're in an urban setting, people who are homeless or struggling, whatever. We started off giving sandwiches, and they took the sandwiches, they had a bit of a chat and they went. Now we're up to delightful Tuesdays and Fridays. We're doing over 100 people who come, and now quite a number of them sit down and start to connect. So much so that we've brought it from the front of the church to hall, so that we can have a more stationary thing. So those people that have come on board for that now realise that they can do not only just a good sandwich, but they can actually be a really vital part of conversation, of respecting the stories of these people who haven't had anyone respect their stories for living memory. So to be part of that, to see that starting to come alive with all its frailties and stuff is really exciting. And that's the positive area of synodality that I see quite exciting. Yeah.
I can imagine. What I would like to know is, in all of these discussions, and if people raise their voices, what happens? In other words, what type of conversations are we talking about? Are we talking about everybody being on their best behaviour? I've done also, Brother Ian's marvellous, we've been through a version at our parish, which was very good. It was very well behaved, and I just wonder, I have been wondering all along about spontaneity and sort of passion and strong emotions, which, most definitely can produce things too. So does that have a role to play?
Well, for me, the way I say it, we can't talk about synodality unless we acknowledge that this is a work of the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. And that means we have to be prepared for some disruptive encounters, because the Spirit, it is of the nature of the Spirit to stir up creativity, to stir up commitment, to stir up engagement. And so we cannot expect that the Holy Spirit, if indeed the Holy Spirit is active, that it will be a matter of being on our best behavior. It's really about listening to how the Spirit inspires us to be part of this. And that's not a monopoly of a particular group of people within the church. That's something that is open to all of us, because the very nature of spirituality, of synodality, is the acknowledgement that the Spirit speaks through every member of this community. And how that happens is not something for me to control, to manipulate, and to channel, but it's rather to be open to the challenge that can present to me, however disruptive that might be.
Have you been through that? Has it happened?
Well, yes. When you look at the voices that are emerging, the fact that we're having this conversation, I think it's important. It's not a conversation about, carefully curated and sanitized issues. It's a conversation about the things we care about as people of God. Are we able to receive that in a manner that is, respectful, but also authentic and honest?
I think most people can be on best behaviour for 2 or 3 conversations, but not for a whole month worth of conversations at an assembly. So yes, there were passionate presentations. There were moments when there was very sharp division across the table, but it's possible to hear and to to sit with this, and this is really the role of the facilitators, to keep the conversation civil, but not to make it tame and just what do we agree on? No, what's actually emerging for each one and for the group. So over the course of that month, yes, there were passionate differences of opinion across tables. And this is part of being willing to go there, to hear what people really think and feel, to sit with the discomfort of someone having a very different experience and perspective and view to yourself. Why it's so very important that each stage is grounded in prayer, that we're listening for the Spirit in ourselves, in each person at the table, in the group collectively. We can't do this just by ourselves. It has to be a prayerful experience.
What happened at I think both of, am I right, Father Paul and you, Sandie, you were at this meeting of the priests?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, you weren't there. It was just... What emerges from clergy, say, in the Archdiocese of Sydney, in terms of hearing all this? And you said, you hinted very strongly that they're seeing it as there's more being added to an already exhausting schedule. And by the sound of it, you've added all of these extra wonders in Liverpool, but is everybody feeling exhausted?
I don't know. They look all right. Well, so in terms of the conference, if we look at I did have a look at the evaluations again before I came. Now, it's a small sample size. We had 220 delegates at the peak over the 4 days in April. And of those, there were about 30-odd responses, so a small sample size. But I think they're representative enough to say that some were just delighted to be with their colleagues and to spend some quality time with them. Now, that's sort of synodality of a kind, isn't it? We're journeying together and connecting with together. There were some passionate others who couldn't understand why 4 days was spent on synodality when it could have been done in one session, and we could have looked at other things like voluntary assisted dying and all the other issues that are confronting guys at the coalface. But there were, in terms of being there, now I was rushing around a bit, but my sense in just talking to people was there was a really great spirit of a diverse group of people, not only in terms of where they are ecclesiologically, but also where they are culturally and along the path of their priesthood and so on. That was very encouraging, I thought, and certainly the Archbishop was happy with the whole gathering.
He was happy.
He was, yeah, and you know that's good.
Something, is it?
That's good. That's good for my career. That's what's left of it. But but certainly, and I was saying to Geraldine that I have quite a number of young priests coming from their first appointment. And I think there are issues here around, and it's not just their generation, that they're growing up in a very, very challenging context, much more challenging than when I started off, where they really need to galvanise their identity individually and as part of who they are. And so the idea of being other than is understandable because they need to define themselves over and against everything else. At a time when the church is saying more and more, no, we've got to be all together, we've got to be all working together and all that stuff, or at least in the way they hear that. So I can't help but think that in terms of our seminaries, certainly, that there's a real challenge here. James Mallon, who's the Divine Renovation person, said, you know, when I went to the seminary, I was taught to be a theologian, not to be a pastor. And that's kind of resonated with me. Now, I'm not blaming because there's a whole lot of agenda that's got to be done. But more and more, if you think about it in terms of the priest part of this, we're calling for a much, much higher complexity of leadership skills. It's exponentially blown out in terms of what was expected of a parish pastor in even 20 or 30 years ago. A high-level, complex set of skills to lead a synodal reality. at the same time as it's more and more aggressive in terms of the context, and also the opportunity to have resources that can help one do that. So there's lots of conversation to be had around our particular part of the world. To be able to help guys more and more, it seems to me that we've got to help guys more and more to be a priest, not just for people, but with people. And both of them are important, but there's a dynamic there and a balance there that is a complex reality when you get to start to say what's got to be delivered by a leader for this kind of church.
Yes. You
I was going to. You mentioned the demand on leaders to assume greater complex responsibilities for leading processes. What I would add to that is that Synodality calls us to recognize that the resources for leadership are distributed in the community, not concentrated or centralized on one individual or one source. And we have to recognize that. If the Spirit is part of this, it's the Spirit that gives gifts and charisms to the community. And these are gifts and charisms that are for building the body, the community, the church. And so I think I need to move away from this belief or understanding that everything rests on me, and therefore I carry this burden of providing resources for leadership, rather than creating a space where these resources can be identified and therefore embraced and welcomed as part of what it takes to build a synodal community. I think for me, when I look at the journey we've made over the last several decades, coming from Vatican II, Vatican II was very clear about, what's the role of the laity? They make present the church in the secular world. Yeah. And the clergy, they deal with internal matters. If synodality has taught me anything, it is to realize that there is no way in which we can simply outsource the reform and renewal of the community called church to the clergy. It has to be a communal experience that involves every member of the community bringing their gifts to the table.
Well, I mean, beautifully put. And I suppose that is the core question before we have a little buzz. And I just would like to ask you both, is there a readiness for that among clergy to sort of do that broader search or tapping, trusting the talents within their own parishes? Because I'm not sure there is.
I don't think we have the option.
And I'm not sure that it's a problem only for clergy within the church. I think it's a challenge for leadership in our society. I think about the various organisations of which I'm a part, and there are some in leadership positions who don't have this kind of freedom for distributed leadership, and there are those who do. So I think one of the formation needs for priests, but for all leaders inside and outside the church, is interior freedom.
What's that mean, interior freedom?
To get past the kind of ego and wanting to control things, not to have one's own way. Sometimes when we're passionately committed to something, we're so committed to our option before we even start the conversation that we're not free to hear what's emerging from anywhere else. So we have to be free enough to even begin to engage in any kind of discernment or to build a team.
I think it also means that for me, in the position that I occupy, I see this as an opportunity rather than a threat. So that it's not that I'm losing something, I'm gaining something because I'm able to be enriched by the gifts that the Spirit distributes, amongst the community. So that's.
I suppose there might be an essence, sorry to cut across you, as to whether you're going to be judged, because there's monitoring of all of these, of these developments. And so it would be fair to imagine people saying, well, look, terrific in theory, but I'll be the one holding the baby at the end of the day sort of thing if things don't work. I mean, you wouldn't be human if that didn't come into people's sort of prevarication, I suppose, or anxieties. I mean, I've certainly seen, one certainly sees that in secular forms, so it would, to me, it's that question of moving into new stages with new possibilities, but there'll be mistakes made there too. And, are people going to be pilloried for the mistakes or rewarded for taking a risk?
I would hope that we will be, understood as for the efforts we make to take that
to take the risk,
rather than castigated for the mistakes we make.
So risk-taking will have to be part of it, won't it?
And I think this process is risky for the church because really, in a way, who can predict the outcome of this process? If it's really the work of the Spirit, we have to be ready for some surprises.
Perfect time to pause and think. So look, I think we will do what we always do, is just turn to each other for about 5 minutes. And then I think we'll come back and say, try to distinguish what are those risks and what are the possibilities, I think, in this next stage that we're describing as we're developing it as we go. It is a very exciting time, but it is certainly challenging. So look, I invite you, we'll welcome you back at 8:05, replete with your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good. So now I'm going to open, I've got some questions that have come in, and I think we might have a couple coming in from online, but I will invite you, if you'd like to put up your hand and ask some questions, and Julie will run around with a mic. So anybody want to kick off, please? Yes, right at the back, please.
Father Orabato, the point that you made just at the end there was something that struck me quite well, because I find as a people in our politics, in our media, in so many areas, we don't accept mistakes. We use them against people, we pillory them, we will take them down. So when I hear you speak, which I agree with you, I think we must be able to set that up, but I don't envy the challenge. How can we do that? Because our instinct in so many areas of our life is to just take people down for mistakes, not accept them.
Thank you very much for that observation. I appreciate that. I have a bit of a background in business studies, and the whole idea of taking risks and learning from failure has been part of my own formation. But I think two things I would say to that is, first, it has to be an honest mistake. We have to be very clear about that. It's not any kind of silly mistake. It's an honest mistake that is an intention to really move things forward. And then secondly, there has to be a willingness to learn from our mistakes. I mean, there are things we could apply this to in the church today, and I won't go into that. But I think we have let me take that back. Not only learn, but also admit that we have made a mistake. That's critical. Where it becomes challenging is trying to dissimulate or to deflect attention, or to in a way, change the narrative. So for me, besides being honest about the risks, it's also important to be honest about the mistakes. And I think people understand that.
You want to buy into that?
No, other than to think that I do think in our culture now, we play the man or the woman rather than the ball, and that is, we're not quarantined from that in the church as well, so that more and more, if you don't agree with me, you don't like me, or you're my enemy, or whatever. And so part of this whole synodal journey is addressing that as well. First of all, because it's anti-gospel, and secondly, because I believe that if we can really grab this and do this well, we can be a beacon to the world and be prophetic in terms of what the world needs, because, as you've articulated, it's even having conversations now of some robustness is getting harder and harder. Yep.
There's a lack of mercy that is quite disturbing, I think, in all sorts of ways. Now, I have one here that has come in from one of our parishioners. How can the Pope better handle what seem to be mixed or inconsistent messages when he gives his opinion or ruling on hot topics, whilst at the same time urging the adoption of the synodal method? Sandie.
Thank you. Well, I sometimes think that we need to embrace the messiness of transitions. And when I think about my own area of study in Catholic social teaching, when I look at documents and there can be some inconsistency creeping in around something, it's often a precursor to a change of position, to a new understanding, a deeper understanding of something. So when we're grappling for a deeper understanding of something, often we're not entirely consistent and coherent in the lead up. Things are beginning to shift. So I like to try to see it as a sign of hope. Sometimes to be completely and dogmatically consistent about a thing, despite whatever else might be changing in the world, is not actually a virtue. To be honestly trying to grapple with things and coming up with things that sound or seem to be inconsistent, maybe actually really truly are inconsistent, to me that's a sign of real seeking for what is true and good. So I think we need to be patient with this and be on that same journey with him in trying to strive for what is our best understanding of this matter at this time, rather than going for the media thing of the gotcha moment, but you said.
Now, you know what this is clearly referring to is the interview that the Holy Father gave Nora O'Donnell in America, which I actually watched today for the first time. And I have to say I got quite a shock at the dogmatic no when the Pope was questioned about the female deacon role. And then, I think this is what then the sort of the offering of the different models available, anything but ministry for women. Now, I mean, that was a shock, actually. Is that how you'd characterise, a sort of a wrestling with movement that is a bit inconsistent?
I hope that it's about wrestling with movement. And there's a long way to go on this question at the next assembly of the Synod. It was raised quite strongly at the first assembly. There were questions in the document for the in-between time that actually encourages us to think about this. There were proposals about further study. There was a real sense amongst, I think, quite a number of the people at the assembly that we have to understand, what is diaconate in the first place before who should be a deacon? What is the priesthood before we can understand who should be ordained a priest? And these are really big questions. So
But that sounded like a no. That sounded like a stopping of that. And that whole process of search, which I found, I thought I understood that. That's how it didn't seem to it didn't seem to foster that.
No, it didn't seem to, and it didn't seem to be in character either.
No.
So I wonder if that's really going to be his final stance on that or not. The bigger question is, what ministries do we need? Not how can we fit people into existing ministries.
Do you want to?
Well, I share your, and I think that will be common to many who heard the interview, the shock, the disappointment, the discouragement, that emphatic, definitive, categorical declaration, no. I think no can only mean one thing, it's no. So I've had to struggle with this, and I really mean this. I've had to struggle with this because, and I told this story, 2 days ago, that I listened to the interview, and a few minutes after I heard the interview, I opened my email. I got my invitation to the second session of the Synod, and I asked myself, do I really want to do this? So I've struggled with it. And here's where I have sort of landed in my own reflection. I'm a Jesuit, and we've been taught in the Jesuit tradition to try to put the best interpretation in someone else's opinion and to give the person the benefit of the doubt. And that's what I'm trying to do, that this is the opinion of Pope Francis, and he's free to share that opinion whenever, however he likes. But if, as I believe, he remains committed to the process of synodality, I want to think that he remains open to the possibility that the people of God gathered in Synod will think differently, and that he will be open to receiving that as a voice of the Spirit. That's how I'm presently sitting with it at the moment.
That will allow you to go, if you know what I mean.
I will go.
Yeah.
The game is still in play.
I see the logic.
Well, just a little bit of what I've read about the Pope's different homilies and stuff through the Synod since 2015. He certainly is against gossip. He would say that if there's issues, we need to bring them into the open. So I suspect there may be an extra question that goes on the agenda for the October session, in which perhaps it's a why question, and maybe that's part of the conversation that is the synodal practice in action.
What is the stage of discovery around this? Like there is a working group, isn't there, about the diaconate? There are 10, aren't there? And the view was, to be honest, that all the tricky things were taken off the agenda to be further developed so that the synod, the process in October, moved forward, all of which I understood,
Well, there are the 10 study groups.
Study groups, right.
But then there are also working groups. And the working groups will actually feed into the process of the next assembly. So they are actually so the study groups will go alongside and beyond, but the working groups will feed more into the actual assembly.
And what's the diaconate part of?
Now, I think that's in one of the working groups.
Oh, so theoretically it should feed into the
So it's still in play. The game is still in play.
And let's not forget that in addition to the study groups, we've had at least 2 study commissions.
I know.
And actually, the synthesis report of the Synod states very clearly the desire to publish the outcomes of these prior study commissions. And I think that's important because there has to be transparency around this question.
Well, obvious. I must say, I read it, I heard it, and I was reminded of that Wednesday moment in our plenary council when, the rubber hit the road, when suddenly everybody said, hey, what's this? And, it changed the course of the council. So it was quite a moment to see that interview today. I don't know, have many of you seen it? Seen the interview? Did you feel like that? Did it strike you or not? Yeah. So, did somebody want to say something down there? Yeah. Okay.
I really am very disturbed by this because even tonight I'm hearing from our priests that you talk about these issues with seminarians, and my understanding is that seminarians are all male. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, we know
Yes.
that.
So I'm wondering what role women are playing in the deep and meaningful conversations that are being had. And, you know, that leads to the big thing about whether women will ever be priests and have access to the knowledge and the information and the processes that seminarians have. So that's my...
Do you wish to buy into that?
I say, I've said this on occasion, I'll repeat it publicly. I'm a convert to Catholicism, to Christianity. And there are certain things that I struggle with in my new faith. And one of which is this, that any organization that deliberately excludes more than half its population from participating meaningfully in the activities of the organization, or rather from contributing their gifts, their talents, their wisdom to this organization. For me, that seems like a dysfunctional organization. However you look at it. And I say this with much pain in my heart, because I love this community. And that's why I converted. And I want this community to thrive, to succeed. But I just think there are certain things we do in this community that are just almost tailor-made to guarantee failure. And one of which is not recognizing that the gifts that the Spirit gives is not contingent on the fact that I'm a man. It's contingent on the fact that we're all baptized. Baptized.
Now, I've got 3 questions apparently. Yes, go ahead.
We've been talking a lot about synodality tonight and has particularly mentioned the spiritual conversation. But there's another element to this which we haven't heard. I've only heard the word once tonight, that was from Father Paul. What is this all for? It's so we can be a more missionary church. And just to throw another word in that we're going to have to grapple with is synodality is hard enough. What about mission? What do we mean by that? But we're all called into that mission that Jesus gave us, every single one of us. So I was pleased to hear that, Father Paul, you were saying that your conversations are leading to activity. And I think this is where it's headed. So if you want to make a comment about how you see that missionary effort broadening. And it was a thing that we was very strong in our plenary council too, to be more missionary church in Australia. And Cardinal Gregg just recently said, what we need in the church now is a missionary movement.
Have you got the energy?
Yeah. So it's a community of missionary disciples. I love that. And it's right there in Evangelium Gaudium, a community of missionary disciples, which is, for us, about engaging our context, about the beautiful gift that we have that we dare not keep to ourselves. The question is how we do that, first to the engaging and so on. But what I think about synodality is it's one of those realities that we kind of we could study, but we're not going to get very far. It's something about us saying how do we do this best in the spirit of the gospel? That is, be missionary. In other words, take the good news to people in a way that they can embrace it and engage it and enter into conversation with that, which empowers me and our people as well as the people we connect with. And in doing that, then we start to realise, hey, we're doing synodality. We're actually this is really something. So I think in terms of it's getting rubber on the road, until we actually start to see missionary discipleship taking real guts, not just talking about it, but actually seeing people's lives change, communities change, all of that stuff, which we're trying to do in All Saints, we won't really get a sense of what we're really talking about in synodality. That's my sense.
Okay, very interesting. Now, I'm just going to move
If I could
around.
there.
Oh, do you want to say something?
Yeah. When I talk about hoping that we become a more authentic church through this movement of synodality, well, what does it mean to be an authentic church? It means to be what we're intended to be. There is no point to the church other than mission. What is the church? We are the community of those who have accepted the invitation to be on mission with Jesus, led by the Spirit to the home of the Father.
Yep.
This is the point of the church. There's no other point to it. And that's the one thing that you could guarantee that people around the table would agree about, that this is the point of it. How are we going to be on mission effectively together?
Can I just say, one other thing that I'd hate to miss before is that the other about the plenary council and all of this is about this beautiful invitation right at the beginning of Evangelicalium. We're called to have a personal encounter with Jesus Christ. This is all about, and we're reminded that at the conference by Archbishop Casello, that who was the main speaker, that it's about becoming more and more Christ-centric in our own personal lives and our community lives, where we actually can say, we know Jesus, we know how he works in our lives, what he's calling to us and all of that stuff. Now, the question for me is, how do we do that? That's a big question. But that excites me, really excites me, because where I've seen people actually come to a deeper sense of Jesus, great things happen. Mission happens and synodality happens. So somehow, how do we take that invitation to facilitate people's personal encounter with Jesus Christ? What does that look like? What are the containers that best animate that? I don't know. How do we do it? Because that's the key. That's the key for me.
Yeah, okay, good. Yes, okay.
Thanks, Geraldine. I'm sure you and I would agree on almost everything, but I had some resistance and questioning when you were talking about this interview, which I have not heard, and I will go home and chase it up. But I wonder about synodality and our preparedness ourselves to be wrong. Someone else once said, if we're really genuine in our search for the truth, we have to be prepared to be wrong.
Indeed.
But Michael Whelan would say if there's an issue that's important, we have to keep putting that issue back on the table all the time until we have discerned and asked and prayed. So is persistence part of synodality?
Good question.
And when do people start getting the crankies when we are so persistent?
Is persistence part of synodality? Sounds a bit parliamentary to me.
Well, I don't think fortitude is parliamentary necessarily. I think that's a virtue, that we continue to pursue what is true and good, but that's different to continuing to insist on one's own way or one's own point. But to continue to bring the matter because it's a matter that's coming up in your prayer and in your discernment, yeah, of course, like the widow, keep pestering.
Keep pestering. Yes.
Oh, g'day. I just wonder, really, is there anything new about synodality? Is there anything different to what supposedly was supposed to come out of Vatican II? And have we already been trying that for 60 years now? But the structural issues that we have, and I hear someone who was speaking to the Pope sort of filtered down to me, And he said, well, he said there's three things. He says there's synodality, there's collegiality of the bishops, and there's primacy. And that's me. And basically, you still have a situation where it's not so much I think people are disenfranchised only by the fact that men are priests, but the power that resides in the priesthood and in the bishops is totally there with men. And basically, to be perfectly honest, laymen have no more say in the running of the church. And really, the structural issues are stopping us from effectiveness. So, basically, the priests aren't trained. They don't know how to run parishes. They've never been trained for that. They're still not being trained for that. We're bringing in people from overseas and not giving them adequate training. And so they go into parishes and perform poorly, which is unsurprising, and they've got all the power. So I just wonder, is there anything new really about synodality? Or is it we've been trying to achieve something, but it's just so difficult for us, even with goodwill and great people, because the structures aren't helpful?
In some ways, that's the core question. I'm going to ask each because I think that's very well put. Is there anything new? Clearly, you are finding something new. I'm hearing it.
Well, I happen to be a priest, so I suppose in that sense, look, I get it. And I don't know how to respond because I'm in a position where I have that authority, and I like it. So I try to be. Let's be really honest. I try to be as within my supervisor. I try to be as humble and all that stuff as well. But I get it. Yep. And my perspective is that I'm going to do what's left for the time for me, what I can do, and pray that other people will take the Spirit forward in other ways. But I mean, the key question I take from it, are you finding through this process access to other talents within your parishes whom you didn't before? Definitely.
So what's prompted that?
The opportunity to be able to it's early days, but the opportunity to gather and firstly be formed, to have some initial formation. By the way, in All Saints, the majority of our leaders are women, like because 70% of our people come to churches are women. The big challenge for us is that we're also seriously multicultural, and we are yet to be representative in terms of that. But the challenge of being able to somehow have the unity and diversity whereby we respect the genius of each of the cultural expressions of faith and not try to make us all one blob, but at the same time get us in some sort of family with different sons and daughters and all of that sort of stuff. And in terms of the beginning of that, the women are the leaders there for sure. So.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting indeed. Sandie.
Well, I see your point. In some ways, there's not much new about synodality. Francis is certainly retrieving teachings of Vatican II, but also renewing them and doing that in a quite different context to the immediate post-Vatican II period. The thing that's very distinctive about how he's doing this is that instead of simply making a document about synodality, he's instigated a process of synodality, engaging the church from the local church to the universal level. So what synodality will become through this school of synodality, actually learning about synodality by trying to be synodal, I think is a new thing. And I think there are new things happening. I wouldn't have imagined 3 years ago that in the Diocese of Broken Bay we would be embarking on a process of pastoral discernment in the deanery that I live in. There are things happening because of this process of synodality, not so much because of the concept of synodality, but the process initiated and the invitation to the whole church to be part of it.
Orabator.
I totally agree with Sandie. I mean, you could even look at it from when you look at what happened in Vatican II, just in terms of the the images from that. You know, how was that conducted? And then since 1965, when the Synod of Bishops was instituted, how did synods happen? And then the Synod on Synodality. You contrast these three images and you definitely see a change over time, where the beginning was exclusively bishops debating abstractly in Latin. And then gradually through the Synod of Bishops, where there's more opening to non-bishops, but also focus on issues of the day, young people, family, Amazonia, etc. And you come to the Synod of Synodality, and we're all sitting around the same table, irrespective of your position, your estate, or your situation, and being invited to listen to one another and what the Spirit is saying through the other. I think there's something there that's new. And the challenge for us now is to make sure that that becomes a way, part of how we are being church. That's the challenge. So there's something new, I would admit.
Yes.
Thank you. It's actually two things, but just on that diaconate, I remember listening to Plenary Matters when you interviewed someone on diaconate last year. And
Phyllis
Sagano,
I think it was.
And I'd always thought that the diaconate was just a stepping stone to priesthood. But historically, evidently, it wasn't that, and it was quite different. So I just realised how little I know about diaconate, and I think maybe we really need to explore, without saying, yeah, let's have this, what does it really mean? But my real question was to Father Orabato, was before you were talking about the importance of the resources being available and spread more widely and just not held in the hand of one or a few. So what are some of those resources that might tell us something about how do we do this, like this gentleman mentioned here? So what are some of the resources that we need or could have that can be shared more widely so we can all feel more able to take our place in this new...
Thank you. Thank you for your question. What I meant by those resources was the charisms, the gifts, or the giftedness that resides in the community, the church, at all levels. And that's in people, in the community. So it's not only concentrated in me because I happen to be the pastoral leader of this community, but it's distributed across this community. So women and men and young people bringing their gifts to enrich the mission of the community of the church. That's the kind of resources I'm thinking about. You know, that if we look across our community, we should be able to recognize that the Spirit is gifting people with particular charisms to serve the mission of the church and to welcome and embrace that. And it could be in any area of pastoral ministry. That's what I mean when I talk about resources. It's about people and what the Spirit...
Who initiates that? I think that's also part of it. Who finds those, you know, do people in the parishes initiate it, or does it require the clergy or whatever?
I think it goes both ways. It has to be both ways. Because again, you know, I have to take responsibility as a member of this community to say that this is where I feel equipped to contribute to the mission of this community, and not simply to hold back and wait to be summoned. You know, I think it goes both ways.
Offer your gifts for sure, but also it's a fact for a lot of women in parishes and in other church organisations that when we offer our gifts, they aren't always received. So we might need to find other spaces in which we can exercise our gifts for the good of the church. So the question of what ministries do we need, rather than always focusing on the ministries that we have inherited at this point in history, I think is also a thing for us to take up with, you know, adult freedom. rather than always focusing on what is Father stopping me from doing. Well, what am I going to do?
And look, it's late in the night, but I mean, have you got a particular dream? Have you seen people follow along this line?
Well, I think an excellent example is Australian Women Preach. It's a podcast of women preaching the Sunday gospel. It doesn't need anyone's permission to set up a podcast. You want to hear women breaking open the word? Go and listen.
Right, okay. Yes.
As a Catholic, I have a great deal of trouble with the Church not being in touch with whatever century we're living. I look at the Church of England, the Mass was then was English, but no longer Latin. I look at the Church of England, they have women priests. This Vatican II, this Synod, we're so far behind in keeping up with today's needs. And it really worries me that the future of the Church is with our children, and our children are turning away because they don't feel, well, many of them are not in touch with God because Catholicism is not up to date. I don't know who wants to answer that.
We've got another question here that came in along those lines. How is the Synod going to reach the currently non-included groups and the 90% of Catholics in Australia who are disengaged with the Church but still identify as Catholic? For instance, in our federal census, some of our children do. So I mean, I think this is it's an incredibly pertinent question. Now, I don't know whether you're finding this process, because you do seem to be really describing some flowering that is most enlightening, actually. Are you getting people back, would you say?
If you talk about numbers at church on Sundays, I can tell you exactly what they are, and they're 80% of what they were pre-COVID. So no, we're not a growth industry in that sense. In terms of young people, we have a number of groups, but look, they're a tip of the iceberg for sure compared to how many young people are around. For example, trying to crack even into our so where I am, we have a college which has 2,200 young people on 2 campuses. 60% of those are Catholic, but in terms of representative, those young people at church, and it's very, very small. So we've tried a number of things, but there's still a long way to go there, and that's just the people that are the Catholic schools, yeah? So, I don't know. There's certain questions about faith in terms of the way the world is, but people say, well, let's keep young people as spiritual, but not religious. And look, a dilemma I have is that still the way the Mass is constituted on a Sunday, where one bloke does most of the talking, and he's quite an odd bod because he's celibate and all that sort of stuff, which I love to do. But I'm very conscious that for young people who are taught to be proactive in terms of all the way they express themselves and participate and all of that, that's a very different experience, and probably for many of them alienating. To be honest, I don't know what we do with that. I think one of the answers is it seems to work better when there's small groups and you can be more interactive and all of that stuff. But the cathedral type kind of experience that we have at Liverpool, where you might have 300 people in the church, for young people where they have to be passive for most of the time, I think it is a dilemma, and I don't know the answer to it.
Now, we've just final remarks.
On that question?
Well, it's up to you, actually. I mean, that's such a marvellous question, but I'm watching the time, so maybe...
Yeah, I think one of the things that was flagged up for conversation tonight was risks. And one of the risks that we haven't talked about is that people's formation and desire to be of service outruns the opportunities for service. I think that's something we need to be looking to. How do we help people to see, to find, to make the opportunities to be of service to the church for the sake of the transformation of the world?
Would you like a final word?
Yes, I would say, well, first of all, I just want to say how delighted I am to be part of this conversation here in Australia, and I thank Andy Nguyen and Michael Gill for facilitating my coming. But the final thing I would say is that the more I've thought about synodality as an experience, a process, as a moment in the church, the more I'm drawn to see synodality in the plural, synodalities. That it's not going to be the same process everywhere. That context would matter, circumstances would matter, and questions would be different. And how we engage with this will be different in different spaces. And we've seen this already. And some of this will be quite contentious. We've seen the German Synodal way. We've seen the Australian Plenary Council. We've seen the Irish, synodal path. And they're all different. And we have to be ready, I think, to consider the fact that synodality is going to look different in different spaces. And we have to get comfortable with that.
Yes, I think this is right. I was just going to read a very interesting piece that was by in the tablet, talking about Father Jesuit, a Dublin-born theologian and former principal of the Irish Jesuits, Father Paul O'Hanlon. I think it was Jerry O'Hanlon, and he just distilled it. It was a very good point, I thought, referring to the Sensus Fidelium articulated by John Henry Newman and in Lumen Gentium. O'Hanlon highlights that, quotes, when there is a breakdown between what the people accept and what the church teaches, there are protocols spelt out, for example, in the 2014 document from the International Theological Commission, signed off, as he says, by Cardinal Gerhard Müller, not anyone's idea of a progressive, that says very clearly that where there is resistance or indifference to or rejection of Catholic teaching, then the church must try to discern whether it's the laxness of people, is it the spirit of the age that is seducing people into something false, or does the teaching need better clarification, or does it need reformulation? It's a gorgeous summary, I think, and quite helpful and, a work in progress. So we're at a very interesting point, I think. And look, thank you all. I think it's been a very interesting conversation. And I particularly want to thank Sandie Cornish, Father Bartor and Father Paul. And I hope this is the first of many. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Denise, do you want to yes, here she comes. Who's our president of Catalyst, just to farewell us. Oh, giving out prezzies, I see.
Sometimes the girls get the good jobs. So yes, it's my job to, you hear that? My job to thank you. It's been a rich evening, a good, honest conversation. I think the people who have been involved are very aware of the strengths of the process, the enthusiasms, the bringing together of people who've never been involved in the mission of the church. They're not naive. They know that people fail to prepare, that they're confused, maybe threatened, and when the pressure is on, maybe the Spirit is not central to the process. So, thank you especially to our speakers and our co-panellists, and here's the prezzies.
Got to have prezzies.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's amazing.
Oh, good. Oh, very good. Very Australian.
So,
Sweet.
There are some other people to thank. From the North Sydney Parish, Fathers Richard and Andy. From Catalyst for Renewal, Julie Thorpe and Michael Gill. Now, Father Orabator, for someone who lives in Silicon Valley, this is very unexciting, but this is the first time we've done live streaming, so it's exciting for us. So, special thanks to the team, Bob and Tristan. And Andy, you're going to, yes, he's going to send you off.
I'm going to have to dismiss you all. Before that, if you can help after the dismissal to help us stack the chairs. Thank you. I think my parish people will be proud of me for saying that. So, go in peace and glorify the Lord by your life. Thanks be to God.